So, Warami Bujari Daramara, everyone. My name is Yasmina Bayraktarevich Hayward. I'm the Community Services Coordinator at the New South Wales Service for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture and Trauma Survivors, STARTS. I have used the greeting in Darug language because I'm now on the Cabrogal country of the Darug Nation, which is one of the many First Nations in Australia. And I have used this greeting because my learning about the language of the country I find myself on is important to honoring the country and the ancestors and the elders of that country. And in my case, this is Darug country, and you are many different First Nations countries. So I will be moderating today. And Zoom has just asked me to confirm that I'm speaking English. I am speaking English, Zoom, thank you. I will be moderating today. What we are doing, thank you all for joining us, is this webinar is the second in a series of 3, introducing participants to the key accountability mechanisms established through UN to hold states accountable to their human rights commitments. And this one, Universal Periodic Review, UPR, that we'll be talking about today, is a way for the UN member states to review human rights records of other member states every 4.5 years. And we have 2 fantastic speakers who will be sharing their knowledge and experience. They'll talk to us about UPR and how civil society gets involved with that. I'd like to remind you all to mute the sound, and if you can leave the image on, then when people are speaking, they can see some faces, not just dark squares. That'll be fantastic. You can ask any questions or make comments via the chat, and we will try and pick them all up to make sure that at the end of 2 presentations, you're able to have your questions responded to. And there will be multiple reference documents posted in the chat by Claire from Diplomacy Training Program. And what I should have said at the beginning is that these series of webinars are a partnership between Diplomacy Training Program, fantastic partners, and STARTS. So yes, Claire from DTP will be posting various resources and links in the chat. The first person we have today is Joshua Cooper, and there is information about Josh in the flyer, but just to say that he's an academic, author, analyst and activist, and Joshua is based in Hawaii. He has trained for DTP before, and he, I believe, has been involved with UPR for some years now. So I will let Joshua take over, and there's the information about him in the chat. So Josh, aloha. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Aloha. Oh, Joshua Cooper koe noa no Hawaii mai ao. I'm Joshua Cooper, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hawaii Institute for Human Rights. I also teach at the University of Hawaii, but one of the roles I appreciate most in the work that I do is with the UN University of New South Wales Diplomacy Training Program. It's been amazing decades to be able to go and partner with communities and hear what matters most, and to be able to be a bridge to make sure that what is raised at the human rights movement at the national level can be utilized in the United Nations human rights global machinery. Today, we'll be looking at the Universal Periodic Review, and it's such an honor to be able to give you a global overview and then look at the example of what is happening with Australia. And it's also exciting because the United States of America is actually being reviewed on November 10th of this year. So it's an exciting time that I think shows the dynamic, really core of the UPR is that it's Sustainable Development Goal number 17, it's partnerships. It's working together and coming with one another to be able to make sure that we can actually shape our national human rights movement and also contribute to a global culture of human rights for all and cultivate that. So thank you so much. What I'm going to share briefly is just the way to make the UPR accessible. We broke it down into 5 phases, and then that allows you to be able to figure out how you want to participate and what you can do based on the priorities you have. What we've always taught and shared with DTP is that the UN process, it's great that it exists, but we have to make sure it works for us. We use it because it's what matters most to us, and utilizing it to really reinforce what matters at the local level at the campus, at the community, and at the subnational as well as the national level. So the UPR, what makes it so exhilarating, I think, to be engaged with is first and foremost, its breadth and depth. It is actually covering the most human rights and allows us to also educate people about all of the human rights mechanisms, not just to show what we know, but to actually strategize and be able to put pressure on our governments to do the right thing. What's important about the UPR is these are all the areas and all the places you could look at to figure out which articles are being violated and which rights you want to uphold. First and foremost, it is the UN Charter. And normally that's just something that's great because for the first time in human history, 7 times it mentioned the issue of self-determination, but also that all peoples everywhere on earth, no matter where you're born, have those rights. Not that you have to ask for them, not that you have to request your government to do the right thing, but that states are duty bearers and we're rights holders. And that was affirmed in 1945. Also, probably since that moment in history to today, there's no other time that the UN Charter matters more than ever. Right now, as I log on, people say, what does it feel like to live in a fascist state? The truth is, that was the idea also in 45. A couple countries definitely stumbled and they said, what can we do to make sure that there's a global order, first and foremost, where everyone's rights everywhere are respected, protected, but more importantly, also that we also understand that spirit of San Francisco about solidarity for one another. And what they said in San Francisco, beside mentioning human rights and self-determination rooted in decolonization, they said that the spirit of never again should be the most important thing that goes forward. And also, if human rights are violated anywhere, we all have a moral responsibility to do something now, not wait till one day, but do that now. And of course, we all learn from many times throughout history when we haven't, Syria, etc. If you don't take care of the human rights violations taking place in other places, it will eventually come to your doors as well. So anything in the UN Charter, so reread that document, get familiar with it, some powerful language that you can utilize as we're talking about human rights in your country. And we know we have many guests from around the world who are in their 4th cycle of the UPR. And we hope this session today inspires you to be able to mobilize at the community level, at the state capital level, and then actually like global civil society. You can always count on DTP to assist. The second is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's super important because that's all 30 articles. That's civil, political, economic, social, and cultural, all in one place. And that might not seem that important, but let me just give a reason why it's important to the United States. It's important because our country hasn't ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So we get to bring up the issue of healthcare, the issue of education, the issue of housing, the issue of water, clean water and sanitation through this UPR, where you'd have to stretch to utilize it under the other treaty body reviews that take place. So that's 2 documents that are the great ones that you can just begin with. The third one is anything a UN human rights treaty body has said while reviewing your country. And Australia has a much better record of ratification, but we all need work when it comes to implementation of those recommendations. But the UPR allows us to review and then reinforce what has already been said, but make sure that language is put into the review. So in the United States case, only ratified 3 of the core treaties: the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and the Convention Against Torture. Australia has a better record, but also falls short in implementation. But this is our chance to go, ooh, remember that CERD review in '99? Remember that. What has been done? How can we actually implement those recommendations and re-engage? So that's exciting. Anything a treaty body has said. Also, you can look at the jurisprudence of the general comments, such as General Comment 39, as Patrick knows, under CEDAW, to utilize that new language to then put the pressure on and coordinate. So this is a chance to use the general comments that are really the evolution or the latest developments or understandings, those elements of those core rights in those 10 human rights treaties, including the subcommittee on torture. So all really important. Then the exciting part is the special procedures. There are 46 thematic special procedures. very important, rights of indigenous peoples who just visited Australia. But anything, when any of those special procedures have said about our country or written in their thematic reports, you can utilize. So this means we review those 46 special rapporteurs. We get those reports they've written. We pull the dust off of it and see what do we need and what's been done that we can utilize in the UPR. The next one is the UN specialized agencies, programs, and funds. And many people think that didn't matter, but I can tell you it always mattered here. And now when you have people who do not understand science and don't understand women's rights and reproductive rights, I know UN Women, UN Population Fund, UNICEF, World Health Organization are all absolutely crucial for us in the United States. And we'll be learning more and more why we should look at what those UN specialized agencies, programs, and funds have said. And finally, international humanitarian law. And if you look at what's going on in Gaza and the weapons of the US that's used in that way, it's also a chance to bring humanitarian law about genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity. So the UPR has the breadth and depth that no other treaty procedure has or any other mechanism. So that's why I embrace it. The other side is we, civil society, get the first word. I saw the beautiful slides that Oliver prepared, and the report is due on June 26th. Ours is due April 7th. So the good news is anything that anyone writes in their UPR submission, the stakeholder submission, will go on the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights website. That makes up the first 10 pages of the review that will take place for 3.5 hours for all of our countries. Second, the UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights pulls together all that they can find that relates to your country. So they also assemble. So that together, the two of those make 20 pages. And then the remaining 20 pages is what the government says. So one of the exciting things, or I'd say the best part of the UPR so far, is that the UPR allows all of us around the world to know the human rights record of every country. And we now have 3 different sets of documents. Before then, only US State Department would write things. And we know how that's going to look going forward for the next 3 years and roughly 9 months. That's not going to look so good. So it's really good that we have these reports. Amnesty International used to do one. That was good, but they can't cover it as completely. So this is great. We now have 40 pages of text on every country every 4.5 years. And so let me share with you briefly the 5 phases of the UPR and how everyone watching can engage and participate and be part of the solution. What's important about the UPR is it's not just focusing on what's wrong, it focuses on what we want. It also isn't just naming and shaming, which we're really good at, but it's also framing and claiming our rights. So it's very comprehensive and civil society centered. And that's what I'd say is the biggest value, is it's our values, our voice, our vision for what we care about in our countries and putting that forward. So in the first phase, I call it preparation. It's mainly education. It's covering what I just shared with you, but talking to community. And I just came back from a tour of California where we were in Santa Barbara, Pasadena, University of Southern California, and also the week before that at Columbia and Harvard. And at all those places, what we're able to do is meet from a living room setting all the way to a college classroom setting, all the way to a community forum. And that's been exciting because it's everyone being able to share what they care about. And no one really asks people what they care about. So this is a proactive, positive, participatory public policy exercise that re-engages people in democracy building and making sure that they're engaged in protecting and defending their human rights. So in that first phase, what we're doing is saying anyone can write a 5-page document, but we're also encouraging people to collaborate. And this is important with the UPR because otherwise, I'll be honest, why should Amnesty International, USA, Greenpeace, ACLU be doing what I'm asking them to do? They're doing it because we have to collaborate because it's a collective review. And then what the government's never intended, though, is it's a chance for all civil society to talk together and partner with one another in a positive spirit of collaboration. And so in that first phase, ours is due April 7th. Australia is due June 26th, also UN Charter Day in many ways, when the UN Charter was actually signed. So I can't wait to submit something for Australia as well, after partnering with Les Melzer on that, on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights. But that's the first phase. You write a 5-page or a 10-page document, submit it, and they all go on the same page equally. So that's kind of exciting, right? You and your report are up there with all the universities, all the different aspects, and we're all together. The second phase is the interaction. And what that is we start reaching out and connecting with governments. And I can give so many examples with DTP. It was so exciting doing the UPR in Nepal and seeing them go from requesting funds and hoping governments would fund them to being true, genuine partners. Because if those governments that made those recommendations to Nepal want to see their recommendation become a reality, they know the NGOs we partner with that worked with them on their UPR actually are not only providing the recommendations, but are the ones on the ground to realize rights. So the second phase is all about interaction, and I can share some of the exciting things we're doing, and some of the things would be exciting to do with you as well in Australia and other countries. Is we organize from the second we turn in our UPR to then figure out how do we interact with governments. And we're doing two new things with that. Number one, we're actually going to do a voluntary local review with anyone who wants to and cast the net again to every person who wants to participate to do a VLR in their community to say how we're doing on those core economic, social, and cultural rights. So ours is going to be called Global Goals on the Ground, Economic, Social, Cultural Rights in the USA, because no poverty, zero hunger, good health, well-being, quality education, gender justice, clean water, and sanitation are all vital aspects that need to be included as we are in oligarchy and really a kleptocracy, and know that these businesses have way too much influence. So we're going to utilize the UPR with the VLR campaign to do that. That allows us to get everybody together to do that from Earth Day for us, April, until July at the High Level Political Forum in New York. But then from New York, August through November, we're going to have events, and we already started. So I can't wait to hear what Australia is doing. We did a side event last week at the Human Rights Council where we were here in the US, but did a side event in Geneva at the Human Rights Council on the anniversary of the elimination of discrimination against women, against elimination of discrimination, racial discrimination. We did that on the 20th last week. So the next one we're going to do is at the UPR in April. We'll also be doing a side event there to tell the rest of the world the US civil society is already geared up. We have civil society ready to speak to you. And what you do in this second phase is you really do a 1 to 2 pager. What's the issue? What's the question? A really smart question, specific, measurable, action-oriented, results and timetable, and even more important, the recommendation. Because we, civil society, know what's actually wrong. We know where it gets caught, where it doesn't get any further, and we become solutionaries. We're not only complaining, but we're creating the solutions that we know our states need. And that's where you offer the recommendation to change that. And what we also do is look at UPR-info database and see which countries are champions and then reach out to them. So we're doing that in one new way as well. We're actually meeting in Boston, in Atlanta, in San Francisco, and in Los Angeles, where I was this weekend, because it's the largest consulate corps in the country. So we're having people, they don't have to go to New York, where we normally have to go to meet the UN missions, like we're going to do a side event for the UPR at the Permanent Forum next month. They don't have to go to Washington, D.C. to do an embassy briefing with all the countries. They can do them on the coast in those different places and reach out. And that's great because everyday people, from UNA associations to Amnesty International chapters to just everyday activists, can be involved and not have to go to the end. So we're localizing the UPR even more in this fourth cycle, which we've never done before. But we got that idea through the Human Rights Cities Alliance that we've been nurturing. Then the exciting part is we're also getting creative. We're going to do video contests. We did that during the first cycle, and the Mockley farm workers made the best video about slavery, about all those things for us, Burger King. For you, I think it's Hungry Jack. Everywhere that tomatoes and lettuce is picked, those were slave labor conditions, and their videos were the best. So we can do video contests together. We can have video film festivals together between Australia and the United States to show what videos our civil society have made. That allows us to utilize social media in a creative way. We can have photo contests. We're working on a song contest with a set group of students. And then that way we popularize human rights education. We cultivate a culture of human rights in our country. And we tell everybody this first two phases, preparation, interaction, is about human rights 2045. What do we want the world to look like 100 years after the UN was created? How strong are we? It's not settling for what we think our governments will do as our governments swing back and forth between conservative and liberal. It's about saying what matters most to us and putting our agenda at the community level, at the capital level, and at the global. The third phase is the consideration. So yours will be almost around Australia Day. Ours will be basically on the 1-year anniversary of the election. So it's our chance to talk about the first chapter of this horrible presidency, but set the record straight. And it's a 3.5-hour review. So what I consider is, I know rugby's big where you're at, or football if you're at Pat's house. But what you do is you set up that screen, you wake up at the crazy hours, and you watch your country get grilled. In a way, it's like one of those delicious hamburgers that Patrick has around his corner in Maroubra. The people are pushing from the grassroots up. We know what matters. We know we're right, but our governments don't listen to us. But the international mechanisms, they're good and they exist, but they know they don't ever get enough pressure. But this is our chance to squeeze from the top and bottom, make a state sandwich or hamburger, and then squeeze the truth out. So that's exciting. And I'll tune in and watch yours, and you can tune in and watch ours. And that's a great way to then engage everyone. And we're already going to watch that just like rugby, big screen. And the best part is we can say now, remember that meeting we had on March 25th? And we talked about this. In less than a year, we'll have the results of that kind of work. And most human rights work, we never get those kind of results. And the reason I say that is anything said during the UPR 3.5 hours goes into the final report. The next phase is adoption. So that is between, for us, November 10th and roughly 1 year from today, because now agenda item number 6 is being reviewed. So we will know how we're doing. Yours will be a little bit after. Yours will be in June. So in January, so it'll be in June. But the exciting part in that phase of the adoption, what we really do is share the results, because no matter what and how exciting it is for the grilling of our governments, the truth is we lose enthusiasm after the grilling. Everybody goes back to their day job. I know you're at Kensington Law, you got tons of things you're doing, you'll be able to get all the NGOs together, but the truth is after the grilling, everyone goes back to their other job because all of us are doing too many things. This is our chance to really go focused and say adoption. The adoption will be at that agenda item number 6. 10 NGOs get to speak, but we get to run campaigns on those different numbered recommendations. You'll be able to organize campaigns. We've done them in the US for sex workers' rights. That was recommendation number 86. They did so well that everyone knew that recommendation. LGBTQIA was Georgetown University. Those students did it, and the government admitted when they adopted it that we're doing this because of the pressure from the youth. So the exciting part also, and why we included the VLR in our campaign for our 4th cycle, is that they take all the recommendations and match them with one of the 17 or 2 of the 17 global goals. So then this allows us to push for the SDGs, because we both know we only have 5 years to go. So for Australia and the United States, we have a lot more to do. And for all of you who have joined us, it's an honor that so many of you are here, 88 of you, that we want to make sure that you can utilize these lessons. And the last phase is implementation. Implementation and preparation all start and begin at the same place. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, human rights begin at home, very close to home. And we can all do that together. And it's an honor to be here. And thank you so much for listening to me. I really appreciate DTP organizing, creating this with START. And it's an honor to be here with Oliver as we're able to share from the community to the country to the global civil society level, how everyone can utilize the UPR to improve human rights, no matter where you live, even under a Trump country. So if we can use it here, you can use it anywhere. So mahalo, thank you so much. And I hand it over to our host. And thank you so much for including us in this process.
Thank you so much, Josh. This was, I appreciated your knowledge, but also your energy and your positivity associated with this. Many of us can feel hopeless about UN mechanisms, and I think you have provided a level of, again, positivity that we needed. Our next person is Oliver May, who is actually the coordinator of Australia's UPR shadow report, meaning there you go. Our shadow report, civil society report, is due on the 25th of June. So he has a big job. Other than that, he's a lawyer and he works at the Kingsford Legal Centre. There is the information about Kingsford Legal Centre in the chat. So over to you, Oliver.
Thanks very much, Jasmina, and thanks everyone for being here. Thanks first to Starts and DTP and to Josh for involving me in this process. My name's Oliver Ray, and I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from Gadigal land in so-called Sydney, Australia, and sovereignty on this land was never ceded. I'm just going to take a moment now to share my slides. Great, that should be working now, and let me know if it's not. Great. So I'm a law reform solicitor and clinical supervisor at the Kingsford Legal Centre, and I'm also, as was mentioned, just one of the members of the coordinating committee for the Civil Society Joint Report to the United Nations as part of Australia's upcoming 4th cycle UPR review. This is also my first time being involved in the UPR process, and so I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you all about it today and learning from Joshua at the same time as you all are too. So my presentation is going to be split into 2 short sections. First, I'll speak to you briefly about what shadow reporting is, how it works, and why we do it. And then second, I'm going to talk about my role coordinating Australia's civil society shadow report and explain the approach that Australia takes and where we're up to in this cycle. So as you've already heard from Josh, the Universal Periodic Review process provides an opportunity for states to assess the human rights performance of other states. And they're assisted in doing this work by 3 main sources of information. So first is the report from the state under review. Second is information from United Nations human rights mechanisms like special procedures and other UN experts. And finally, there's reports from other stakeholders. So this includes national human rights institutions like the Australian Human Rights Commission, and also civil society organisations like many of you are from here today. They can be both domestic in Australia or international. And civil society organisations are invited to make submissions to the United Nations, which are then distilled, as Josh mentioned, into a report by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, alongside the contributions from the National Human Rights Institution. So all of the various reports that are made by civil society are kind of condensed into this 20 pages that Josh mentioned. There's a number of strict requirements that apply to the provision of these reports. So first, as Josh mentioned too, they're due well ahead of the state's review, or their grilling, as Josh put it, by other member states. So Australia's appearance is not until next January 2026, but the report or any reports from Australian civil society are due by the 26th of June. There's also strict word limits for individual organizations and coalitions. So for an individual organization, it's around 2,800 words, but for a joint coalition like the coalition that we're coordinating, it's 5,600, which it doesn't sound like a lot and isn't a lot for 5 years of human rights across the whole spectrum of human rights that Joshua mentioned. They have a preference for English, French, and Spanish language submissions, and submissions can't be anonymous or confidential. Finally, the report should be credible and reliable and give information about the human rights situation in the country that's under review, and should make recommendations that are smart. So I think Josh mentioned this before, but basically specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This helps to ensure that the recommendations that we're making are not vague, but instead they're targeted, and the progress of states towards these goals can be tracked in concrete ways. So as Josh has also mentioned, and sorry to be repeating you so much, but without shadow reporting, we'd only be getting a very one-sided view of the human rights track record of a state. So without shadow reporting by civil society organizations, we'd only hear the Australian government's perspective on their own performance, which, as you can understand, would not paint a full picture. So shadow reporting ensures that a fuller picture is put forward and that the human rights situation in Australia and other countries is accurately represented. As was mentioned earlier, civil society organizations can't present themselves during the UPR review process. It's done by other states that play a role in reviewing Australia. And so that means that civil society organizations like the Kingsford Legal Centre or Amnesty International can't make any recommendations themselves directly to the state. So as a result, the goal of putting forward these reports is that the recommendations we include are picked up by states who are assessing the country under review, and that helps translate the expertise of civil society organizations on the ground into pressure from states through the UPR process. Once the report is submitted, there's further work involved from us and from others lobbying the missions of other states to pick up key recommendations. And Josh talked about that process of identifying champions. We'll identify particular countries that have an interest, for example, in intersex rights or an interest in ending slavery. And we'll speak to those missions about putting forward recommendations on those topics to Australia. So there's a long process, and Josh has gone through all of that. But one of the other reasons why people should submit reports to the UPR process is that shadow reporting provides a snapshot and point-in-time assessment of human rights on the ground in a country. And this can be used as a tool both domestically and internationally to raise awareness about key human rights issues and to lobby for change. So in Australia, in our last submission in 2020, one of the key issues was around raising the age, and we were able to use the UPR report and the UPR process to fuel an existing domestic campaign around raising the age of criminal responsibility for young people in Australia. So an organization that Josh has already alluded to that organizations can turn to for support is this non-profit called UPR Info. So this is a dedicated non-profit organization based in Geneva that was set up specifically to help civil society organizations engage with the UPR process. They provide a really wide range of useful resources. For example, during cycles, they provide information sessions and briefings to help facilitate lobbying. We've attended a number of their sessions throughout this process, and it's been immensely useful. So if your organization is thinking about being involved in a future UPR process, this is a great place to start. So as I mentioned, the next section of my presentation is to talk about Australia's specific approach to shadow reporting and the role that the Kingsford Legal Centre, where I work, and our partner organisations are playing in this process. So Australian civil society rather, has participated in the UPR process since its inception, and we've largely adopted a pretty similar approach over that time. That approach is to provide one single report on behalf of a really wide range and cross-section of civil society organizations. So our report is typically split into thematic sections, such as children and youth, disability, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and each of these sections is co-authored by different human rights experts across the country. And I'll get into the process of drafting the report a little bit more in a moment. But there's a number of different reasons why we adopt this collective approach. First of all, resourcing and for practical reasons. As well as participating as a convener of this group, I also have my full-time day job, and as many of us know, we wear a lot of different hats, and it's very difficult on top of the workload of a lot of civil society organizations that are quite stretched to also find the time and energy to put in their own submission. So being able to come together to provide a joint civil society report is a good way of pooling our resources and working together. Another reason why we put forward a joint report is the authority that comes from speaking with one voice. So in our last submission in 2020, the submission was endorsed by 202 organizations across Australia. This helps give the report credibility. So when the United Nations and when other countries are thinking about adopting particular recommendations, they can know that the recommendations we've put forward represent a pretty strong view of a cross-section of organizations across the country and are not just the views of one particular organization or a handful of individuals. The reason why we split the report into thematic sections, often based on identity, is also based on the way that organizations in Australia are structured and funded. So a lot of organizations are funded to help, particular demographics of people. But in order to make sure that the report is not siloed, we review it and edit it with a panel of experts from each issue area to ensure there's an intersectional approach across the report, acknowledging that many of the human rights issues that are raised in each section, they don't exist in a vacuum, and everyone's human rights are interlinked and codependent. Other reports to ours that we facilitate do exist, and we never seek to prevent any organization from making their own independent submissions, but just to facilitate a collective approach where that's what organizations would like to do with us. So the other members of the coordinating committee alongside the Kingsford Legal Centre are the Human Rights Law Centre, Community Legal Centres Australia, who are participating this year for their first time, and Indigenous Peoples Organisation of Australia. We've been involved as the Kingsford Legal Centre in this process since its inception, although, as I said, it's my first time, so learning a lot. Our role as the coordinators is to play a facilitative role in bringing people together and ensuring the report is cohesive and that the timeline and technical guidelines are met, so we don't seek to put forward any particular views or agendas beyond the consultative approach that everybody participates in. So the process so far for putting together this report started in December of last year when we convened a meeting with organisations that were involved in previous iterations of the civil society report for the UPR with the Australian Human Rights Commission in December. We've also held a number of online forums since that time to get civil society organisations involved, to bring them together, and to solicit expressions of interest in being involved in working groups across each of the different thematic topics that I mentioned to you all previously. We've, since that time, convened different working groups on each of those topics to get started on drafting sections of the report to be brought together into the final draft. At this stage, our next steps are that the initial draft content from each of those expert working groups is due around the 31st of March, so very soon, next week. And from that point in time, we'll be bringing those different sections together to consolidate and edit them for repetition and ensuring, like I mentioned, that intersectional review, going back to various authors where gaps have been identified and ensuring that the final product makes sense as a whole. We're also recruiting pro bono support from a number of firms to assist with the substantive review of the resources and to do some of that grunt work that civil society organizations can't always do themselves. We'll then be asking organizations, including many of you on the call, for endorsements by early June to try and get as many organizations on board endorsing the report as we can. And like I've said a couple of times, the final very strict deadline is the 26th of June. So I've just included here the contact details of a number of people involved in the process on the coordinating committee. You can reach out to any of us if you'd like to be involved in the process or you'd like to learn more. And I'm sure that my contact details may be circulated after this. I'll chat to the organisers to see what the plan is there. And that's all from me, but now I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Oliver. So we've got a bit of time, and I've picked up a few questions from the chat, and maybe we can start with I guess the question relates to, I think probably goes to Joshua because it does relate to previous experience with UPR. So Brave has asked a couple of questions. One is whether UPR is only effective for democratic countries and not dictatorships. Is there a way of being effective in any other way?
Yeah, so great question. I've been fortunate enough to do probably around 100 UPRs with everything from China, which is probably definitely falls under the dictatorial one, working with Tibetans and Uyghurs in that sense. Mm-hmm. And then now, welcome to the new America, which is very much racist since its origins anyway, but just very apparently now. Working on it in this new setting. So I think no matter where you are, you can organize and utilize the UPR to grow a national human rights movement. I would say you just have to be more careful. So when UNSW-DTP does trainings and when we have people who could potentially be targeted as human rights defenders, we always think about safety first. So I think it's important you can organize and have partners that will then write the stakeholder shadow reports and have colleagues actually do the advocacy for you so that you're not up there, because it's not safe. People have died doing the UPR from China, and they now have statues in Geneva for their names. So this is serious work, but safety is absolutely most important. And we always do that in the work that we do. On the other hand, I saw another question from Vietnam, and we just did the Vietnam UPR, and we organize and only work with the diaspora outside, who can then submit the reports, but we get the information directly firsthand from the people whose rights are violated on the ground, but don't expose them. So we cover them to make sure they're safe. So I definitely want everybody to take this serious, but always human rights, safety, and security is first and foremost. But no matter where you live in whatever country, you can utilize in good ways. I'll be honest, it's definitely more of an urgent sense right now under this 2.0 of Trump. And like I said, I was in Columbia University the day after Mahmoud was picked up. So it was just supposed to be a human rights education, academic freedom, UPR, and that intensely changed. And now they're utilizing the UPR to bring that up, and now it's national and global news. So the UPR will be that space. But on the other hand, in our first UPR, I had Julian Assange show up at our actual UPR in Geneva on the actual review date. So, you know, there's always something, but I would say it's most importantly, you know, reiterating what Oliver said as well. It's a chance for everybody in the country to come together and talk about human rights and what matters most to them. So I'm glad, Brave, that answer on Vietnam helped you. What we have to do with Vietnam is focusing on the ICCPR. The Human Rights Committee will review Vietnam this summer in late June, early July. So we reinforce the good recommendations we got from the UPR and push there in that sense. But thank you so much for your questions. And that's a good thing about the UPR. It was intended to make sure every country was covered, and allows all of us to join together to make sure that no country gets a pass in this process, and that everyone gets to have their voice heard.
Thanks, Josh. And I mean, Brave has also raised the issue of safety for victims and reporters mentioned in reports, as well as potential for authority oppression after the shadow reports go in. So yeah, you've kind of commented on that as well.
Yeah, no, we can be honest. With this current administration, everyone I've talked to, I told them that it's a very vindictive, mean-spirited, and Heritage Foundation and other groups have definitely politicized everything beyond a shadow of a doubt, even straws, I guess, to show America can make America suck again. But you know, what we need to do is not be afraid, and that's what human rights is all about. It is the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, freedom from want. And to know that we're doing the work that's supposed to be, because that's how World War II happened, when countries had regimes such as ours. And when those countries stumbled, they drag all the other ones down with them. But the people on the inside have to do the work first. And that's what I've always told people. I've always told people, it's your UPR and we're here to help. So now's the time that we have to do that. And it's the UPR of the US, the UPR of Australia, and who knows what your next regime will be. Hopefully it'll go Canada, eh? And your other party will have more power, but you never know. So that's why the UPR and human rights is so important. Everyone stands up for their own rights, and human rights is the toolkit to defend ourselves first and foremost, and then we hope the international solidarity exists. And Cambodia, we work very closely with Indigenous peoples in Cambodia. We coordinate with them to make sure that their voice is heard. And we have participated. The last time we were super active was 2013, but that's when it was still safe to sort of work in Cambodia. And that was the last time DTP, we did strong trainings there. And since then it's deteriorated. So, you know, you have to work and make sure that you don't put anyone beyond safety, and make sure that we don't create more human rights prisoners of conscience for Amnesty International. So that's, I think, the way that we do that and coordinate. But it's an honor to participate today, and I appreciate the great questions that are genuine.
I might throw one to Oliver. There's a question from Sophia that came between Braves and Shanti's question. It was around how can people join as individuals? How can people actually participate as individuals in this process?
Sure. So it depends a lot on the country that you're living in to a degree, but my understanding is that individuals can also make submissions directly to the process in the same way that civil society organizations can. You've got the same deadlines and requirements as other organizations, but you can absolutely write your own submission. You can also get involved in any civil society organizations that are writing submissions, reaching out, for example, if you were in Australia, reaching out to myself or to other coordinating committee members to play a role in drafting our report or one of the other reports that's being drafted in this context. So, reach out to the organizations in your own country to see what's being done already and if you can be a part of it. And if not, feel free to start, leading that work yourself because like Josh said, it's your UPR. This process belongs to us and it's important we take ownership of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Oliver. It sounds like you can contact Josh as well, and he will know who to talk to in various countries by the sound of it. Now, next question. I don't think there were any. There's a question here from Apajita about migrants for Bangladesh exploiting indigenous citizens in Assam by spreading AMR. I'm not quite sure. That's a statement, Apajita, but I'm not sure if it is if there is a question in there. Maybe you could type a question in the chat. I wanted to also ask Oliver, you said there's 21 thematic areas in, there's a Rosa's question you've already responded to that, Oliver, but I was going to ask you, what is Australian one focused on? What's our next one, Shadow Report, focused on?
Yeah, so the structure is very similar to our 2020 report. We've made a couple of changes. We've added in a section on digital and privacy rights to reflect that sort of growing concerns in that area. This time around, we have a section on workers' rights as well as pandemic and disaster response. But all of the existing sections that were covered in 2020 will still be in the report. In terms of our focus this time, we're going to see what comes up in the drafting and what is sort of brought up through this consultative process that we've been involved in to identify what, for example, our 5 key or our 1 or 2 key campaign areas might be. So last time around, I mentioned it was around raising the age, but the sort of process of identifying what our sort of key campaign areas might be is one that will come down the track. Yeah, in terms of our particular issues, everything that was in the 2020 report and more.
Right, thank you. What about US, Josh? Anything you'd like to share? What is it that's going?
The question is what isn't? What isn't? Every day
what's your top 5?
There's no way to prioritize that. The good news is this: in the third cycle, we had nearly 4 dozen working groups. So the way we organize in our country is we had task force co-chairs, and I was fortunate to serve in that role for these 3 UPR, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And then we have working groups. So anyone that wants to create a working group, as long as they can have 2 people in it, can then write a thematic study. So we unfortunately are doing our best to keep track of, but it's always added every day. I'll be honest. So I did UPR trainings in California this weekend with just a living room and all the way up to arena of over 100. And something that never came up in the last one was corruption. So democracy and corruption came up. That wasn't really a focus because in that other cycle, that wasn't an issue that, oh, good gosh. But now with today's world, we're working with Transparency International and connecting with them and doing that more. So I believe in the end, there'll be more submissions than usual. We're also utilizing this as a moment to build up the U.S. Human Rights Network, which was the body that normally coordinated these events. So they had sort of gone down. So it's an opportunity to also rebuild that group that had always been the leader for these UPRs. So it's great to see the groups that Australia has. It's great to see how you're creating a coalition. We've been doing that. And then I can also say, I guess the easiest way to put it is I've been consulting with Greenpeace International, Amnesty International, United Nations Association, and then multitude of just groups who reach out and ask questions. Here's an example, Greenpeace. Greenpeace was just going to do one on slavery at sea and also the global plastics issue. But then with the lawsuit by that horrible corporation bringing them to court in North Dakota, they're also bringing up SLAPs and lawsuits that are frivolous and bringing that up with especially the ruling that just happened. So the truth is, like a SLAP, we never did one on SLAPs last time, which is litigation. And so we will definitely have over 6 different thematic reports, and more people are writing, but I think that's also a good sign. This one's going to be a little bit messier because we're just reaching out and talking to anyone and not saying they have to just do everything with us. Normally you're in the working group, you're doing that, but when you see what goes on every day, you have to just be, what happened to you? I mean, freedom of expression, academic freedom, that didn't really come up last time, but now Columbia University is being told if they don't punish people and not let them graduate if they protested Palestine, that they won't get their 400 million. So I think that's absolutely crucial, that's a new one. Also USAID, we all know projects we were all doing in the Pacific that got cut. So that global issue is huge. So what's exciting is that people are responding and rising up, and more issues are coming forward. It just is a challenging time, but I'm pleased by the engagement by everyone else, and I hope it doesn't turn to this situation, and that Oliver has a very benign academic exercise of putting together all of theirs, as opposed to, I would never wish what we're facing now on anyone.
Thanks, Josh. We wouldn't either. Now, we've got like 5 minutes left, and I think Claire is going to finish for us, but there is a couple of other questions. One was, if Oliver, you can quickly just say, have you consulted with communities affected by human rights issues? And if you have, how did that work? There was also really good, I mean, there was a comment with Shanti and Brave talking about needing to be trained and supported to participate in the process in a way that's safe and in secret. And I think maybe that's for Patrick to pick up at some stage. But maybe Oliver, Lindsay's question, and then there was a big question from Timor-Leste.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Lindsay. It's not a perfect process and we certainly can't reach everyone, but what we've been doing is reaching out to organizations that have a profile, doing advocacy in each of the areas that our report is touching on, reaching out to them and inviting them, to join the process, and relying on those organizations, many of which are community legal centers or other advocacy groups, to feed up, what the priorities are in their sector to us, based on their experience working directly with groups. So as the Kingsford Legal Centre, we're leading the section on discrimination in the report, and that's based on our experience as a statewide expert on discrimination law and the stories that we hear every day from our clients. So we're relying on other organizations, like you mentioned, to feed those stories rather than hosting direct community forums because of the time and resource constraints.
That's fair. Thank you, Oliver. We also had a question from Mainton, who is actually not in Timor-Leste, but from Timor-Leste, but living in Brisbane. And Mehmet has asked about effectiveness of China UPR. I know Mehmet well, and I don't know if Claire, can we let Joshua answer that before we say goodbye?
Cool.
Yeah, that's fine.
UPP does a great job at hosting a UPR work, and we would definitely do a UPR training if you want there during the time that we're there in August, September. And we've been very active in previous UPRs, meeting with the ombudsman, meeting with parliamentarians, meeting with mainly, of course, civil society and our alumni network there. So it's exciting when the UPR comes up, because it's a chance for alumni to be able to be involved. It's a chance to remind everyone why human rights matters. Otherwise, we're all busy doing the work that we're doing. And as Oliver pointed out, we all have other jobs, And so this is a chance for us all to do the greater good and coordinate together.
Okay, thank you. I think we might have to finish. There is more comments about enforcing UPR and effective ways to encourage people to speak up. I think there's some future work for the diplomacy training program in the area as well. We need to find you more funding, Patrick. Recording will be put, Dharmendra, recording will be available, as will the slides by Oliver. And Claire, shall I hand over to you now to do the vote of thanks?
Thanks, Yasmina. On behalf of the Diplomacy Training Program, I'd like to thank both Joshua and Oliver for their time this evening here in Sydney. It was really useful and a great session, both Joshua in terms of providing us with the overview of the UPR and the 5 stages that make up the UPR, and how civil society can engage with the process and make it a more useful program, and a way that there can be some dialogue and we're actually moving forward with advancing human rights and getting the issues out that are happening in each country, and how you can also utilize the international engagement to be able to support you and your issues as you go through the review. And Oliver, thank you for sharing with us what the Australian civil society are doing, and what the process is here, and what we're going to be looking at and focusing on over the next year. And I'm sure that there will be a number of people that are interested in either contributing to the overall coalition report, or starting up their own individual submissions or organisational submissions here in Australia. So that was very useful information about how to go about that process. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today and for being so engaging in the chat and asking your questions. A big thanks to Yasmina for stepping in at the last minute and doing a wonderful job moderating. So thank you very much. DTP really values the partnership that we have with STARTS, and we're really enjoying this 9 webinar series that we're working on with them. You'll find the information about the previous webinars up on the website, and the last one on the UN Human Rights Accountability Mechanisms is going to be held next Thursday, the 3rd of April at 6 p.m. And that's going to focus on the special procedures. And we've got Clément Voul, who is the former Special Rapporteur on the right to freedom of assembly, as well as Ben Saul, who is an Australian and is the current Special Rapporteur on counter-terrorism. So that will be another really interesting session. And so I hope all of you will join us. You should all have received an email right now with an evaluation on the webinar. We would really appreciate that if you could fill that in. It's only very short, it's about 2 minutes. But that really helps us in the preparation and planning of future webinars. So that's basically it. As Yasmina said, you'll get the recording, the PowerPoint, as well as all of the resources that will be sent out to you probably sometime tomorrow, if not by the end of the week. And once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a good evening, a good rest of the day, depending on where in the world you are.
Nice
Thank you.
to have this